decided it's not warranted. Well, it turned out that one of the political appointees had pressured the scientists and had changed their determinations from what was clearly warranted to not warranted. And then in 2007, Judge Windmill, I believe, said, down in Idaho, said, wait, you can't do that. It's supposed to be a scientific determination, not a political determination. She eventually resigned because of when these stories came out about influencing the science. So the judge ordered the Fish and Wildlife Service to go back and you got to redo the analysis without the political pressure. And they came back and said, hey, guess what? It turns out we really should list this bird. Obviously, it lives in sagebrush habitat affected by grazing, wildfire, oil and gas development, hard rock mining. A bunch of its habitat has shrunk dramatically, and its numbers have declined dramatically. In 2011, thereabouts, the Forest Service and the BLM, it has habitat on both, began revising its land use plans. Ultimately, 98 different land use plans were affected. But because it's such a big deal, the colored is the current sage-grouse habitat, the green is kind of the priority habitat. You can see this is not a simple issue to deal with. Because of the huge range of people and places that are affected, the agency decided, hey, we need to do this right. And they went out to all of the states, approximately 1,100 different ranchers, all of the state agencies, and said, what should we do? And the reason they did that is because they didn't want to list the bird as threatened. They wanted to create adequate regulatory mechanisms, you go back to that ESA language, that would protect it without having to list it. Because once it's listed under the ESA, that's an enormous hammer that hits everybody the same. Very powerful tool, really restricts what you can do. Very useful tool, I think, in certain circumstances, but they were afraid that the sage-grouse would be like the spotted owl, or like the salmon, would create conflict that would basically be eternal in the salmon case, unfortunately. So they got together, got all of the different parties, and decided, how can we regulate this bird so as to avoid those consequences? In the end, with the exception of this state that looks kind of like a gun, and a few people in Nevada, the states all agreed with it and are on board. So Wyoming, Colorado, Montana, and in fact, it was the Nevada counties that challenged the plans, not the governor himself. The states were all on board, and the Fish and Wildlife Service chose not to list because of the new land use plans that the BLM and the Forest Service had established. Again, massive collaborative effort, all of the parties involved. It really did seem like a good story. Ranchers were part of it, everybody was part of it, except for a few folks. Nevada wasn't, our governor wasn't, and some this little industry that produces oil and gas. So that was in 2015. Everybody touted it as a wonderful success story. Of course, all of those stories and videos have been scrubbed from government websites at this point. And then recently, the Zinke said, we're going to revisit all of those plans. And we're going to revisit them to look at these things. First, we need to facilitate oil and gas development in priority habitat. Basically, it said, let's remember the language, clarify the exceptions and things that would allow for oil and gas development in priority habitat. But the justification for changing the plans was to promote development of our energy resources. That was one of the justifications, so you know what that means. Reduce or eliminate these sage-grouse focal areas. The focal areas were those areas determined to be the most important for the sage-grouse. They're leks, the best habitat, and the plans restricted any surface. It didn't allow any surface disturbance activity in the focal areas at all. So these are the most significant areas. He said we should look into reducing or getting rid of them. That's also the focal areas are the one thing that the Nevada court said was potentially problematic, because between the draft environmental analysis and the final decision, they moved them. And so the court said they didn't quite know where the focal areas would be, so go back and analyze that. That judge did not stay the plan, said the plan should continue, just go back and analyze that. But Zinke wants to get rid of them. There's this general increased flexibility concept. And then this is not part of the plans, but the Secretary had also withdrawn 10 million acres from hard rock mining for a couple of years while they had time to study what areas needed to be protected. That's important because hard rock mining, you can just go out at any time on your own without any permission from anybody and stake a claim and get rights to that claim. So in this case, they said, okay, for 10 million acres, we're going to pause for 2 years and not let people do that until we figure out what needs to be done. Zinke revoked that withdrawal. Makes me sad because of the massive collaborative effort that went into it. People from all sides of everything that agreed on this. So those are 3 examples of things that are changing. There's a whole bunch of other examples of things that have changed. Eliminating scientific advisors from the EPA, things I mentioned. What does it all mean? So the first thing, different policy goals, that's totally fine. This is starting to drive me nuts, especially when a majority of people didn't necessarily vote for, across the country, didn't vote for President Trump. But elections do have consequences, of course. Get tired of hearing that when you're the one that it's being told to, but that's how it works. Multiple use of the public lands means that whatever the administration is gets to decide how we go about doing that. And that's how the system works. So that's not a problem to me. What bothers me, though, is science matters, and it should matter. And the administration is less concerned about the science of its decisions so far. They're just eliminating entire rules that took years and years and years of study to create because we disagree. That's ignoring the science. And this one, for a Westerner, I grew up in Idaho, and I don't know, kind of like sagebrush hippie or something, I don't know if that exists, but I love the people of the West, and people matter to me. And so when all people across the West get together to come up with a plan that doesn't make everybody happy, but generally works for everybody, and to have Zinke, who claims to be the heir to Teddy Roosevelt's throne, if you will, throw it all out because he has other goals in mind, and some of that's coming directly from the president, of course, promoting energy development on the public lands. But ignoring the people, that to me is problematic too. But the way this works best is the people who are involved get to make decisions based on the best science, and in those circumstances, I think the system works. So that's the concern part, is that we're transitioning away from that model. Other administrations, Republican or Democrat, followed that model. And they're great examples from at least including even from the Reagan administration, not necessarily the first part, when Watt was Secretary of the Interior, but even then, there are examples of all administrations performing or acting in this way. So that's kind of the biggest change. So anyway, that's what I have to say. Thank you very much for letting me join you. And I think I left time for questions, a few questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting, your Science Matters last week, we listened to Anita Hill talking about a different topic, but she said, we need to collect data, we need to pay attention to that data and use that data in making our decisions, which is exactly what you're saying there, which is, I think,
In different contexts, right?
Exactly. I love the way it echoes.
The question that law students hate the most from their professors is why? And because people are used to just stating opinions without explaining. And we live in a world where all that matters is the explanation. It should really be the only thing that matters. Why do you think that? What are your justifications for it, such that convince people? I tell my students, lawyers are 2 things, fortune tellers and storytellers. That's what you do. You either try to convince somebody your vision of the world is the better one, or you try to predict what the future is going to be. That's all about explanation and data